What if a band made one of the greatest hard rock albums of all time and then refused to do it again? What if, right at the moment the whole world was watching, they looked at each other and said, no, we're going to do something different? That's exactly what happened with Deep Purple and Fireball. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the decision still divides fans to this day. Was it a bold move of genius or a missed opportunity that cost them everything? Stay with me because the story is wilder than you think. Let's go back to 1971. Deep Purple had just come off the back of In Rock. That album had blown the doors of the music world. It was loud, it was fast, it was aggressive. Songs like Speed King and Child in Time had turned them into one of the biggest rock bands on the planet. Fans were hungry, the music press was watching, and everyone expected Deep Purple to come back swinging even harder. But here's the thing, a band barely had enough time to breathe. The touring schedule had been brutal, night after night, city after city. They had pushed themselves to the edge. They were exhausted, and yet the label wanted a new record. And they wanted it fast. So they booked studio time at Delay and Leia Studios in London, and later at the famous Olympic Studios, and they started working. But it wasn't a slow, comfortable creative process. This was a race against the clock. The band would come off tour, stumble into the studio, and try to make music while running on fumes. There were arguments, there was tension. There were moments where it felt like everything might fall apart. Producer Roger Glover, who was also the band's bassist, later described the sessions as chaotic. Ideas were thrown against the wall. Some stuck, many didn't. The pressure was enormous because everyone knew what they were following. How do you top In Rock? How do you even come close? And that's where things get really interesting, because Deep Purple decided they weren't even going to try. Here's where the story takes a turn. At some point during those sessions, something shifted. The band started putting in different directions, musically speaking. And instead of fighting it, they leaned into it. Ritchie Blackmore, the genius guitarist whose riffs had powered In Rock, was still there. John Lord, the classically trained keyboard wizard, he was still there. Roger Glover on bass, Ian Pace on drums, and of course Ian Gillan, one of the greatest rock vocalists who ever lived, right there at the microphone. But together, they started doing something unexpected. They started experimenting. Instead of doubling down on the crushing heavy metal that had made them famous, they began reaching for other things. Jazz influences crept in, funk rhythms appeared. There were moments that sounded almost psychedelic. Some tracks were fast and raw, yes, but others were slow, moody, and strange. Why? Why would a band at the very top of their game risk all of that? Some say it was boredom. When you've already made something as loud and powerful as In Rock, maybe the only interesting challenge left is to go somewhere else entirely. Some say it was artistic pride. These were serious musicians who refused to be locked into one box. And some say it was simply the chaos of the sessions bleeding into the music itself. Whatever the reason, Fireball became something nobody expected. Let's talk about what's actually on the record, because it's quite a ride. The album opens with the title track, Fireball. And for a moment, just a moment, you think you know what you're getting. It hits hard. Gillan's voice screams into the opening with an almost dangerous energy. Blackmore's guitar is sharp and ferocious. Sounds like the natural next step from In Rock. And then the album starts going somewhere else. No, No, No arrives like a freight train. But there's something looser about it, almost jammy in the way it sprawls and breathes. It doesn't feel tight and controlled the way In Rock did. It feels alive in a very different way. It feels unpredictable. Then comes Demon's Eye. This is where things get interesting. It's slower, it's groovy, there's almost a bluesy swagger to it that feels very different from the band's earlier work. Gillan doesn't scream here, he simmers, and it works beautifully. Strange Kind of Woman is another standout. This one actually had been released as a single before the album came out, and it gave the world a hint of something different was coming. She looked like a raver, but I could never please her. There's a call and response section between Gillan's voice and Blackmore's guitar that is simply jaw-dropping. It's playful, it's clever, and it's the kind of musical conversation that makes you want to stop whatever you're doing and just listen. The Mule is one of the more unusual tracks built around relentless drum pattern from Ian Pace. It gave the drummer a vehicle to show just how powerful and precise he was. It's hypnotic in a way that feels more like prog rock than heavy metal. Fools is arguably the most ambitious track in the record. Long, epic with shifts in mood and texture. Feels like the band flexing their muscles in every direction at once. John Lord's keyboards are front and center here, and they bring a grandeur to the track that lifts it something truly special. And then there's Anyone's Daughter. Farmer's Daughter. And this one genuinely surprises you. It's gentle, almost acoustic in its feel. There's a warmth and humor that stands completely apart from the rest of the album. It's the kind of song that makes you do a double take. The Deep Purple just makes something that is kind of sweet. That's what Fireball is. A collection of songs that don't always feel like they belong together, and somehow that's exactly what makes it fascinating. When Fireball came out in the summer of 1971, it went straight to #1 in the UK. So commercially, it was a massive success. But the critics, they were confused. Some loved it, some praised it for taking risks, not simply copying themselves. They heard a group of genuinely talented musicians, stretching, growing, exploring. Others were not so kind. They wanted another in rock. They felt cheated. Some reviews used words like scattered or unfocused. They couldn't quite understand what Deep Purple were trying to do. And the fans, they were split too. The hardcore metal fans felt the band had stepped back from the edge. Where was the fury? Where was the relentless power? But other listeners, maybe ones who had always sensed that there was more to the band than just volume, were thrilled by what they heard. Here's the twist though. Just 1 year later, Deep Purple released Machine Head. And Machine Head contained Smoke on a Word, and suddenly everyone had a slightly different opinion about Fireball because it was now sandwiched between the two. So where does Fireball stand in 2026? It's complicated, and that's exactly why it's worth talking about. Most Deep Purple fans today recognize it as a genuinely brave record. It's a band refusing to play it safe. It was musicians who were technically gifted enough to try anything, and they did. In a career full of landmark albums, Fireball is the outlier. It's the odd one out. It's the experiment, and maybe that's what makes it so interesting. In a discography full of albums that sound like Deep Purple, this one sounds like Deep Purple trying to figure out what else they could be. Some tracks haven't aged as well as others. Some feel a little rough, a little unfinished, the product of those chaotic recording sessions. But others, like Strange Kind of Woman and Fools and Demon's Eye, feel as powerful and alive today as they ever did. Fireball is not their best album. Most fans wouldn't say that, but it might be their most interesting one. If you've made it this far, here's what I want you to do right now. You see the playlist appearing on your screen. That is every single Deep Purple album review I've done on this channel, up to this one, start to finish, but I add more as I make them. So check out the playlist, and you can work your way through, starting from their first album, and you will hear how the band evolved, changed, and shocked people. They came back from the dead and kept going. And again, I will be continuing to make these videos. So if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there's a lot more coming. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.